really telling the hypocrisy here because she's telling everybody to be concerned about rapists and murderers crossing the border, but inside the country, like, let's say, at her own party. Hello, I'm Colin.
And I'm Charlie.
And welcome to the C&C Talks podcast, episode 9 of season 3.
Yeah, just a reminder, we release episodes every week and we talk about politics, world events, and sports. It's currently Tuesday, March 12th, 2024 at about 8 p.m. Pacific time. And we have an announcement to make. We are live streaming our March Madness bracket predictions on Wednesday, March 20th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, exclusively on YouTube. Hopefully, for both of us, our predictions go a little bit better than they did last year. I had UConn going out in round 1 last year, and as you may know, they won the whole thing last year in the men's side. So let's see if I can do a little bit better this year. And Colin,
Yeah, we
I
had,
think what
we
we
had a
should
lot
do.
of fun on that live stream. Last
Well,
year,
we
we were going
did.
to do both the men's and the women's brackets again. This year, it did go pretty long last year, so we
And
might try
Colin,
to
I think
shorten that
we
up
should
a
at some
little bit.
point, maybe this is initial live stream, maybe this is a special episode. We should take a look at just how bad our brackets were last year.
It was sad. Like it really was. Now let's move on to politics, and we're going to start with Joe Biden's State of the Union address that he delivered last Thursday night to a joint session of Congress. All of the usual people were in the room, and this was, Charlie, I would say, a particularly good speech. Joe Biden has, I think, delivered some pretty good State of the Union so far, but this one, I think, was the best of them. He was very fired up throughout the entire speech. Republicans, they had been attacking him for months, obviously, about how he's sleepy, he's senile. If that's true, which I do not think it is at all, it definitely did not come through in his speech. He was really, really fired up. He was ad-libbing more than really any president probably has ever ad-libbed during the speech, which makes sense given that the Republican side had some trouble keeping decorum as usual. There were heckles throughout the speech from the GOP side of the chamber, including from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was showing up in a MAGA hat, breaking dress code against House rules because, decorum, very, very important. Just ask them what they think of John Fetterman not wearing a suit. So there is that. But yeah, now Republicans, after the speech, they're saying he was too fired up, which is the complete opposite of what they've been saying for months, and really just a sign that they just want to throw everything at the wall and hope that something will stick when it comes to attacks on Joe Biden. Now, for the content of this speech, it was, I would say, for the most part, kind of what we expected. I will say he kind of set the tone at the beginning of the speech by referencing the Civil War and one of FDR's State of the Unions in 1941. So, in terms of stakes, like, you cannot get much higher in American history. So that's kind of how he started. He talked about democracy early on. He gave a very good defense of Ukraine from the podium. I think he said that Russia will not stop with Ukraine, but that Ukraine, they can stop Putin if we stand with Ukraine, if we give Ukraine the money, the resources that it needs. Charlie, which I know that you can say some more about how those efforts are going.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit here. But something that I really did want to focus on was the response from the Republicans. This is by Katie Britt, who is a senator from Alabama. This was an absolute disaster.
It was really creepy. They decided that she should give it from her kitchen, which is just a weird choice. I think Republicans think that women should be in the kitchen, I guess. So that was their theory on having her deliver it there. And then she delivered it in this really creepy tone. It felt more like she was auditioning for a part in a play than delivering a response to the State of the Union. SNL brutally mocked it over the weekend. it was really brutal to watch. One of the worst responses to a State of the Union I've ever seen, and it's a hard job, but it was bad. And the content of what she said is important, though. I will get to that once I finish talking about what was actually in Biden's speech, because Biden, it did in some ways feel a little bit like a campaign speech, not necessarily in a bad way, and it felt that way because Biden was able to do something that you're not normally able to do from a State of the Union speech, because you can't really just go attacking your opponent, but you can absolutely like go after his predecessor. That's how he referred to Trump in the State of the Union. My predecessor, right? He attacked Trump, some of Trump's policies repeatedly. He attacked Trump for his NATO comment. He had the Prime Minister of Sweden in the House. This was the day that Sweden had officially joined NATO. Now, in terms of applause, it's always been theatrics with applause at the State of the Union. Republicans applauded even less than normal. None of them would even applaud for things like political violence has no place in the U.S., and you can't love your country only when you win. Mike Johnson, who was sitting behind Biden, he also did not applaud when Biden said that the January 6th insurrectionists failed, which makes sense given that he was one of those insurrectionists. But there were some great quotes from Biden during this speech. One of them I mentioned about what Trump said about NATO. He said, "It wasn't long ago that Republican President Ronald Reagan thundered, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Now my predecessor tells Putin, do whatever the hell you want." Which, yeah, is accurate. Biden also, he spent quite a bit of time talking about IVF access and abortion access, which is being threatened. Kate Cox, the woman in Texas who had a long saga over attempting to get an abortion for a child that would not be born, either way. Biden had her at the speech as a guest. He pushed back on the Supreme Court to their face. It was something that I had really never seen before. He essentially said, "You're about to find out how much political power women have in America." I've never seen anything like that before. He promised to codify Roe v. Wade if it gets to his desk, something that is not going to happen, at least not in this Congress. He touted how great the economy was, which he has the right to do because the economy is doing really well in this country right now. 15 million jobs in 3 years under Biden. Unemployment rates are at a 50-year low. And there are very specific policies that we can point to that contributed to that, such as the CHIPS Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law. He talked about the importance of the middle class. This is very common rhetoric from Biden. We've seen this quite a bit. He touted the Inflation Reduction Act for lowering insulin prices. He says that he now wants to cap insulin at $35 for every American, not just Americans who are on Medicare, something that will definitely face difficulties in Congress, but Biden already has a great record on lowering drug prices, as well as with unions. He introduced the UAW union. President Biden, of course, walked the picket line with striking auto workers, the first president to ever do that. He then got an endorsement from that union. Republicans, they seemed very tuned out during the speech, and I wonder if they regret essentially putting the bar for Biden at dementia, because then when he way overperforms that bar, they look like fools, and he looks very, very good. Biden talked about wanting to give public school teachers a raise. Charlie, yes?
I did want to discuss one of the more controversial aspects of his speech, and that was Marjorie Taylor Greene's interruption. So what exactly happened there? And Colin, what are your thoughts on that?
So I don't remember exactly which one was her, because there were a lot of Republicans interjecting, but
regarding the Lake and Riley incident.
Oh, the Lake and Riley incident. I'll get to that one in a sec, but Republicans fell into the same trap that they did last year. If you remember, Biden essentially forced them to applaud protecting Social Security and Medicare, because when he said that some people want to, in the chamber, referring to Republicans last year, that want to cut Social Security and Medicare, he got a lot of pushbacks, calls of lies from the GOP side, and Biden said, "Oh, you don't want to do that? Great. I thought you guys did. That's in your policy." But So essentially got them to stand up and applaud keeping Social Security and Medicare the way they are. He was able to do essentially the same thing this year because Republicans fell into the same trap. But the Laken Riley incident, yes, Laken Riley was unfortunately murdered by an undocumented immigrant. There are also people in this country who are murdered by people living in the US, right? That's not to say that the immigration system doesn't need reform, but at this point, it's just Republicans politicizing Laken Riley's death. That's what it is at this point.
Yeah,
Biden,
and I think just on the border in general, Biden made a solid attempt to get border legislation passed, and the Republicans, particularly Donald Trump, who was one of the major reasons that that bill did not pass. So if you tank a bill that had basically everything you wanted in it, you can't then go complain that the bill that you passed that you failed to pass and would have solved all the problems. The problems aren't solved.
well, but this is the exact reason why Republicans blocked the bill is that they
Well, of
wanted to be able
course,
to
it's
campaign
a
on the
fully
issue.
political move.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. Completely political. Biden, he talked about some policies that were broadly popular in America, such as ending junk fees and capping credit card fees, which is just, again, very, very popular. He did touch on Israel and Gaza. He essentially did set somewhat of a red line for Netanyahu. Now, Biden, since the State of the Union, he has proposed potentially conditioning some of the aid if Netanyahu invades Rafah, if he launches a ground invasion on Rafah, which, Charlie, I believe that there's 1.5 million Palestinians currently sheltering in Rafah.
Yeah, Rafah is a city in the very south
Yep.
of Gaza. It's right near the border with Egypt, and it is one of the only cities that has not been moved into by Israeli troops, and they are threatening to do that. I believe that what Israel's trying to do is they are trying to get the remainder of those hostages back.
Yeah,
And
but
if they don't, then they have threatened to launch an invasion of Rafah, which
yeah,
I think would be an absolute disaster.
Here's the thing. I've been very, very hesitant to use the term genocide to describe what is going on in Gaza. I think that it's a term that we should not use lightly, and I don't think what has happened so far amounts to a genocide. I think my tone on that would somewhat shift if Netanyahu launched an invasion of Rafah,
I
because
think it would depend on
the
how it was
number of
carried out.
civilians that would die in that situation would be unlike anything that we've seen so far.
Yeah, as I said, I think it really depends on if they do launch an invasion, how it's carried out, in particular. But I do
Yeah,
think that would significantly shift some public opinion.
absolutely. I think too that it is probably a good move for Biden to make that a red line. Now, what exactly does a red line mean? Does it mean that the aid will start to get conditioned? It's unclear. Biden's been somewhat intentionally vague on that, so we'll see. Republicans did boo the border security bill that they helped negotiate, and James Langford, the lead negotiator in the Senate for Republicans, when Biden was talking about what was in the bill that was like full of some conservative policies, he was like nodding his head and he mouthed, "It's true," which yes, it is true. Biden, he talked about the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, how we need to renew the Voting Rights Act. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act needs to be passed. Biden talked about threats to democracy in general. He talked about book bans. The great quote, which was, "Instead of erasing history, let's make history." And then he talked somewhat about what he describes as his unity agenda, some very, very, very popular things that should be popular on both sides of the aisle, but aren't necessarily, that essentially would really do so much to push America forward. And he did talk about climate achievements. He talked about how violent crime rates are at an all-time low, including much lower than during the Trump administration. He did talk about gun violence in this country. It was really just a long speech throughout. And Charlie, like I said, absolutely unlike the GOP response from Katie Britt. We talked about kind of what was wrong with it in terms of how it's going to be perceived publicly, but I do kind of want to note that there was substance in this speech. Not good substance, but there was substance. And I think that the most interesting thing is she talked quite a bit about the border. She said that she went down to the border in 2023 and she met with a woman there who shared a story about how starting when she was 12, she had been like raped by the cartels and sex trafficked, and it had gone on for years. And essentially, Katie Britt decided to blame this on Biden. Problems with this, though. She completely lied about the story. It happened in Mexico, this sex trafficking of this woman who, obviously, very sad story either way, and it happened during the Bush administration. So you're literally using the rape and sex trafficking of another woman for your own political gain. And it's also really telling that when talking about how the border's so open and how this is such a big problem, how rapists and murderers are flooding into the country, this is the only example that Katie Britt could cite. This is the one that she decided to cite. And I don't think it matters to her that it's now coming out, all this stuff about how she completely lied about it. Sure, it's not a good look, but you have to remember how many people watched that response to the State of the Union. That's a huge stage, whereas it's not a huge stage when she just goes on some TV network and apologizes, which she still hasn't even done. But even when a TV network calls her out for it, that's nowhere near the same audience. And it's also really telling the hypocrisy here, because she's telling everybody to be concerned about rapists and murderers crossing the border, but inside the country, like, let's say, at her own party, she has endorsed Donald Trump, a rapist, for president. He was found liable for sexual assault against E. Jean Carroll. We have the Access Hollywood tape about him bragging about raping women. And really, the Republican Party is the party of rape and murder, right? There's so many examples. Matt Schlapp, the head of CPAC, has sexually assaulted numerous men while being extremely anti-LGBTQ. Obviously, Trump with the sexual assault issues. The leader of the Alabama Young Republicans was just arrested for murder and sexual torture against another man. A former congressional candidate that Trump had endorsed a couple of years ago was just arrested for murder. There are countless examples of Republicans being rapists or saying a bunch of things about rape that are not a great look for somebody to be saying. Essentially, it makes it sound like they're pro-rape. And then, right, Katie Britt was wearing a cross necklace. I mean, let's look at the number of pastors who have been arrested for child sex abuse, right? The numbers are huge. So what Katie Britt is essentially saying is that it's bad when rapists and murderers come across our southern border, but it's perfectly fine when it happens inside the Republican Party. And let's be clear, there are illegal border crossings. That is a real thing. And some of those people have committed murder or rape, right? For example, Laken Riley was killed by an undocumented immigrant. That's a fact, okay? And of course we should prevent illegal immigrants from entering the country, from people illegally crossing the border. I don't think that is extremely controversial, except it seems to be to Republicans because they are the ones currently who are blocking border security bills, right? We mentioned this because Trump wants to campaign on the issue. He wants to say there's an open border, so they're blocking a bill that would stop there from being as open of a border as we have right now. And guess what? Our legal immigration infrastructure needs significant improvement too, and the GOP does not want to solve either one. And improving the legal immigration system would also help deter illegal border crossings if there was a better system to get into the United States for immigrants. But they're against any immigrants coming across the southern border, but only the southern border. They're okay with it elsewhere just because of the inherent xenophobia that they have put on full display, especially by saying that all these people coming across the southern border are rapists and murderers. You don't hear that rhetoric when they're talking about people coming from Canada, people coming from Europe. That's just not a thing. And America, here's the thing, was built off of immigrants. We are, at our core, a country of immigrants. And therefore, being against immigration in this way that the GOP has shown themselves so clearly to be is an inherently anti-American position, Charlie.
Yeah, I agree. But I think we do need to move on from the State of the Union. Let's get to Congress, which we always seem to be able to talk about. And in fact, people leaving Congress. Kyrsten Sinema is not running for re-election. I mean, I think we saw this coming. She was not going to win again. She switched
No, she was
parties.
polling at like 8%. But what this does mean is that, so I think Democrats have a decent shot at keeping the seat. I think Ruben Gallego, probably Carrie Lake. I think that Sinema was only going to hurt Democratic chances there.
Well, she wasn't even really a Democrat. She switched parties. Yeah. She switched.
Exactly. But what this means now, if Joe Biden wins re-election, if Democrats can retake the House, and if Democrats can hold the Senate, right? All three of those things probably aren't going to happen, but it's not that much of an impossibility that they do. If all of those things happen, then you're going to have essentially a majority in Congress. You're going to have a trifecta that is not dependent on the votes of Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, which means you can, in all likelihood, get rid of the filibuster and you can pass the single most progressive agenda in U.S. history. You can codify abortion access into federal law. You can pass extremely progressive climate bills that would take huge steps towards saving this planet. You can pass universal background checks. You can pass an assault weapons ban. You can pass bills that would protect democracy by getting dark money out of politics, by ending gerrymandering, by putting a national floor under voting rights. You can pass all of those things if Joe Biden wins the presidency again, if Democrats keep the House, and if Democrats keep the Senate. Those are the stakes of this election. And to those who say that elections don't matter, I think it's very, very clear that they do. Now,
absolutely. Now let's talk about Ken Buck, shall we?
Leaving Congress, a Republican. The GOP majority in the House is going to be down to 2 seats. It is razor thin and shrinking by the day.
Colin, at this rate, they're gonna lose the majority before the election hits.
It would be really funny if Hakeem Jeffries gets the gavel in like October, and it would just be a perfect example of how this Republican-led House of Representatives has just been a disaster.
The leader in all-time votes for speaker, I think.
At the end of the year, though, is Bob Menendez. He has said he will not run for re-election. Now, he wasn't going to win anyway, but he did manage to pick up another indictment, this time for obstruction of justice. So, great work, Bob. I'm sure that you're really representing
one less election campaign, one more indictment. What? I don't know which one so would I either run for re-election or get another indictment? I don't know. 50-50.
Yeah. Let's move on to Robert Hur. You may remember this is special counsel who was investigating Joe Biden's handling of classified documents.
The guy who called Biden a well-meaning old man with memory issues.
Yeah, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Well, it turns out a bunch of his report was just fake.
Fake in what way, Colin?
So he wrote up this report that essentially exonerated Biden from any crimes, but essentially attacked his memory. The whole memory thing was made up. He said that Biden couldn't remember when his son had died. That was completely false. He said the exact date that his son died when he was first asked about that. So he just faked the report. And Robert Hur, it's looking increasingly like he was just a partisan hack all along. He actually, a couple days before he testified before Congress, which happened Tuesday morning, he actually left the government and became a private citizen, which meant that Republicans were able to help prepare him for his testimony. Essentially, they were able to prep him, which is like not a normal thing. So it just looks more and more like he is a partisan hack. Now, it's also, at this point, probably time for the national media, who, after this Her report came out, they ran dozens upon dozens upon dozens of stories about Biden's mental state. And essentially wondering, should he drop out because of this? Blah, blah, blah. A whole bunch of just crap. And all of it was false. And you haven't seen any of these news organizations issue huge retractions, huge President Biden, because the thing that they were basing their articles off of was completely false. The report was did not have a basis in reality. And the media has a big role, as much as they don't necessarily like to admit it. They have a big role in how people think about politics. So if they're continuing over and over to run articles about how Biden might not be mentally fit for the job, and then they just run like one short thing about how actually this report was kind of made up, people are still going to be thinking, okay, Biden's probably not fit for the job, and it's based off of this false information, which is why the national media, including New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, they really should be issuing front page apologies.
Yes, they really should. And should we talk about Mark Robinson?
Yeah,
He was
I guess we
the
have to.
Republican nominee for North Carolina governor. And oh boy, he has an interesting story, doesn't he?
He's kind of everything that you don't want in a candidate. I don't know if he's going to win. I kind of don't think he's going to win because he's this insane, but I guess we will see. For those who do not know, yes, Mark Robinson, he's the current lieutenant governor of the state of North Carolina. He just won the Republican nomination to be the state's next governor. That race will take place in November. So who is this guy? Well, put simply, he's a Holocaust denier who thinks that the moon landing was fake, and what else? He says that MLK was a communist. He says that that Black Panther was created by this group of like Jewish like anti-American stuff. I don't even know. He's called LGBTQ people filth. So really just a good guy, all around conspiracy theorist, bigot, not the type of guy who has any qualifications to be the governor of one of the states of this country.
Yes, he in a direct quote has also said, "So many freedoms were lost during the civil rights movement."
Oh, really? What freedoms would those be? And that's actually kind of weird because he's black, and so I'm really curious what he thinks and why exactly he's against the civil rights movement, which he said was run by communists. So none of it makes sense. None of it goes together. But this is the guy that Republicans think is their guy to be the next governor of North Carolina. Seems like a great choice for them.
Yeah, we'll see how they vote in November. Now let's move on to the world stage. The U.S. has managed to send $330 million worth of weapons to Ukraine. This was essentially scrounged up by the U.S. military, and this will help, but it won't hold for long.
Yes.
The issue is I don't think a lot of people realize modern war is incredibly expensive.
It really
This
is.
This should help Ukraine hold the Russians back for 2 weeks, maybe 3, but Ukraine needs more help, and Congress just has not been able to do that.
Yeah. I'm curious whether the Biden administration could essentially use a tactic of taking frozen Russian assets and giving them to Ukraine, because that might be their only option at this point with just how stalled things are.
Yeah,
in Congress.
the issue with that is it is jointly frozen by the US and the EU, and a vast majority of the money is in the EU, and the EU is just not willing to do that.
Huh.
Considering that if they do, they would be on direct front lines of Russian aggression.
Yeah,
Which
that is.
Given the political calculation of doing that, I just don't know if that adds up for them.
That is a good point. I do quickly want to mention that Congress actually did do something this week. They passed, I believe, 6 appropriations bills, which fund half of the government through September, through the end of the fiscal year, and the other half of the government is still to be determined on if that will be funded, but at least Congress finally did something after booting it down the road for 6 months. We only have to go through this whole thing again in 6 more months.
Good job, guys. Good job.
I think it's time for your stat of the week.
No, we still got some more world events to cover.
Oh, do we?
Yes, we
What
do.
have you got for us?
The U.S. is also beginning to send aid to Gaza. They have sent a boat from Cyprus with supplies, and they planned to build essentially what is a floating harbor in the Eastern Mediterranean to help assist with supplies. So that should assist with the food crisis going on in Gaza at the moment.
I mean, I think the Biden administration is really unhappy with how Netanyahu has handled that. Netanyahu has blocked most humanitarian aid from getting into the country. So this is kind of a way of the Biden administration going around Israel and kind of directly delivering some aid to the people of Gaza.
Yeah, and the last thing I wanted to get to was the crisis going on in Haiti right now. The prime minister is the former prime minister is out of the country right now. He is in Puerto Rico, and gangs have essentially seized the country, broken into prisons to free inmates, and have essentially started a civil war in Haiti. And as this is going on, as this crisis developed, the prime minister is still stuck and cannot get back due to the airport being under fire from the gangs, and he can't get into the Dominican Republic either because the Dominican Republic has said, we don't really want you here because that might cause tension with our government. So he's stuck. He has basically been forced to resign. He said he would, but we don't have he hasn't officially done it yet. He says he will, but the question is, what's next? He said that he would step down on the grounds of a transitional government being created. He came into power in 2021 after the previous prime minister was assassinated, and called for elections. He then delayed those elections, and those elections still have not happened. So there was the potential of him becoming essentially a permanent leader of the nation until this event happened. But really, the international community the question is, what's next for Haiti?
Yeah, I do not know. But Haiti, a country that has kind of constantly been in a crisis as of late. I believe some natural disasters hit there a couple years ago. I think we touched on that. And
we did.
Yeah. So now, Charlie, you've got a stat?
I do.
Go ahead, go for it.
We already have teams getting eliminated from the NBA playoffs, their contention, and now it is a drive to see who can get the first overall pick. It looks like it's going to be between undoubtedly Washington, probably Detroit, maybe Charlotte, maybe San Antonio. But it is very likely that the number 1 overall pick will have a huge impact. Think Victor Wembanyama. But looking back, how many of the last 10 first overall picks in the NBA can you get, Colin?
Of the last 10?
Yeah, I already gave you one.
First of all, I don't think that next year's draft is going to be an especially strong draft class. But obviously the first pick still matters quite a bit. But there's no Wembanyama or even anything close to that in this year's draft, I do not think. But it was Wembanyama last year.
Yep.
It was Cade the year before?
Cade was 2021, yes. 2022. If you can't get it, I'll give you the team, which I think
it was Paolo Banchero.
Yeah, it was Banchero in 2022. So yeah, Wembanyama, Banchero, then Cunningham. 2020.
Anthony Edwards.
Yes.
Ooh. I do not know who it was in. Wait, no, Edwards was 2020. Yes.
Yes.
Can you give me the team for 2019?
The Pelicans.
Oh, it was Zion. Yep.
Yeah, Zion.
It was Zion. Ayton was a number 1 pick. Yes.
Ayton in 2018. Yep.
Okay. So how many more years?
The next 2 are generally regarded as pretty big busts.
The rest were?
No, it's the next 2.
The next 2. So it's 2016 and 2017. Teams, please.
Both Philadelphia.
Ben Simmons.
Ben Simmons in 2016.
I do not know who they drafted in 2017.
He's currently on the Magic.
That doesn't help.
It's Markel Fultz.
Oh, yeah, no. And then
All right, and
2015 and 2014, what are the teams?
Minnesota and Cleveland.
Oh, Wiggins?
Wiggins in 2014.
That was Minnesota, yes?
No, that was Cleveland.
Oh, that was Cleveland. Minnesota drafted. I don't know who they drafted. Who was it?
Karl Anthony Towns.
Karl Anthony Towns has been on the Timberwolves for 10 years?
Well, 2015, so 9. But yeah.
9 years? Wow.
Yes, that surprised me too, actually. All right. Let's move on. Speaking of basketball, let's get to Champ Week. Colin, I know you paid attention certainly more to these games than I did. We got major upsets, probably. Chaos,
Lots.
of course. Let's give a rundown of Champ Week.
It's college basketball, so there are always going to be major upsets. That is a given at this point, as everybody should know. Let's start with the game that just finished as of us recording this, the rubber match between Gonzaga and St. Mary's. Gonzaga won in Moraga. St. Mary's won in Spokane, which is somewhat surprising, but St. Mary's coming away with the win. They won 2 out of 3 from Gonzaga and now won the West Coast Conference tournament for the first time since 2019. Now, in terms of bracket impact, probably not much. Gonzaga and St. Mary's, they were both going to go to March Madness regardless. Now, on the women's side in the West Coast Conference, Portland had a major upset of Gonzaga, snapped a winning streak of Gonzaga that has been going since Thanksgiving weekend. So Gonzaga still projected to make the women's tournament field, but Portland now a bid stealer. Someone on the bubble's getting left out because Portland now has that auto bid. In the Atlantic Sun Conference, Eastern Kentucky got upset by Jacksonville. They were the number 1 seed. It is brutal right now for top seeds in one bid conferences because the regular season doesn't matter that much. You've got to perform for 3 or 4 days in March just to get into the tournament. So Stetson getting the bid from the Atlantic Sun Conference. Longwood going from the Big South. Charleston, the top seed in the CAA. They're going on Oakland, the top seed in the Horizon League. That conference. Now, in the Missouri Valley, there's a blockbuster game between Indiana State and Drake. Both teams that, without an auto bid, would, I think, be firmly on the bubble.
Is this men's or women's?
This is men's. Drake winning that game, and they're in the tournament. Indiana State now firmly on the bubble. We will have to wait until Sunday to see if they make it, but really, they've won, I think, more than 25 games. They should be in the tournament. I get that their conference isn't that great. I get that their out-of-conference schedule isn't that great. But it's not that great because teams like them, teams like James Madison, who, by the way, won the Sun Belt Conference and are going to the tournament regardless, teams like that call up a whole bunch of teams from power conferences, ask to play them, and then the power conference teams say, no, they don't want to play mid-major teams that are projected to be pretty good because the incentive just isn't there for them to play those types of games. And so these teams like Indiana State, they might end up getting left out, and a team like Villanova, who is barely has more wins than they have losses, is likely going to end up making the tournament instead, which is just not a good system. Now, in the Northeast Conference, which may be the worst conference in the country, but what Wagner did was extremely impressive. They beat the top 3 seeds in the conference on the way to the Northeast Conference Championship. Morehead State going from the Ohio, Samford from the Southern Conference, and South Dakota State from the SoCon. Now, there was one big upset, which is in the Big Sky Conference, Eastern Washington. Another loss. They were the second straight year that they were the 1 seed in the Big Sky tournament, second straight year of losing in the first round, so more heartbreak for them. Now, On the women's side, we've seen quite a bit more championships already decided. The ACC, Notre Dame getting that championship. Richmond winning the Atlantic 10 conference. The Texas winning the Big 12. UConn winning the Big East. Not a big surprise there. Iowa winning the Big 10. The Caitlin Clark effect is real. People are watching those games, which is great to see. She really impressed in the championship game. Presbyterian won the Big South. Green Bay won the Horizon. UT Martin won the Ohio Valley. In the final Pac-12 championship, it was USC Stanford. USC kind of led the whole way, pulled off a slight upset of Stanford. Now, there's some bad blood in the SEC between the top two teams, South Carolina and LSU. They got into a nasty fight in the last couple of minutes of that game. South Carolina came out on top in the game. However, their best player, Camila Cardoso, will be suspended for the first game of the NCAA tournament. Probably won't matter. They're a one seed, so they'll be playing a team that is not particularly good, possibly a first four team. And then in the SoCon, Chattanooga won. South Dakota State won the Summit belt. As I mentioned before, Portland won the West Coast Conference. And the best part, as of this recording, we've still got most of these conference championships up for grabs. Most of these auto bids to the tournament all this Sunday for both the men's and women's brackets. March Madness kicks off on Tuesday the 19th with the first four. We'll be doing our brackets, Charlie, next Wednesday.
Oh, we certainly will.
Now, a non-conference championship, conference championship game that was still really great was Duke-UNC. UNC went to Cameron Indoor and won. UNC now 2-0 versus Duke this year in probably the biggest rivalry in college basketball. Now, let's move on to something that we don't talk about much, and that is soccer. We'll start with the CONCACAF Women's Gold, the first CONCACAF Women's Gold Cup, and it was won by the U.S. 1-0 over Brazil in the finals. But the semifinal match against Canada was just a phenomenal game. Alyssa Nair, the U.S. goalkeeper, is phenomenal at penalty shootouts. I went to a penalty shootout. She blocked most of the shots and then converted her own penalty kick. She may be the best penalty shooter on the team somehow. Shame that that couldn't have been the penalty kick result in the World Cup, but you'll take yet another trophy from the U.S. women's national. Now, in English soccer, we had just a blockbuster game between Liverpool and Man City. Quite possibly the final matchup between Klopp and Pep, the two coaches who are the two best coaches in English soccer right now, some of the best all time. And it again ended in a 1-1 tie. There's an argument that Liverpool should have had a penalty kick late in stoppage time in the second half. Wasn't called. And the race atop the Premier League, now Liverpool and Arsenal, even Man City 1 point behind. 1 point behind, sorry. Liverpool done playing both of those teams this year, I believe. Man City and against each other coming up at the end of this month that I'm sure we'll talk about on this podcast.
It's going to be a real close finish at the top of the league.
Another place is interesting is the NHL. We have not talked about them that much, and for good reason.
Well, for one main reason that the Kraken are really bad this year.
Sure, and Charlie and I are only mildly qualified to talk about anything. We'll be honest, we don't follow hockey especially closely, but in the West, Vegas, the champions from last year of the Stanley Cup, they're just clinging on to the final playoffs. They may be in some trouble.
They are the 7th seed right now. I'm sorry. I read the standard. Yes, they are the 8th seed. The top seed in the West currently is Vancouver. Really coming out of nowhere. They had a couple of bad seasons coming up to this. The Dallas leads in the Central Division along with the Jets and the Avalanche, who are tied for second. Third, fourth would be Edmonton, but yeah, pretty close for the final spots. And as for the Kraken, they're sitting just about, depending on how you look at it, they can guarantee a spot in the Pacific if they gain 10 points on LA, but there is the season's running out of time. I think really they need to look towards next year. They sold the deadline, certainly.
Yeah, they traded Alex Wennberg.
As for the East, Panthers Panthers lead the Bruins by 3 points at the top of the Atlantic. Rounding out the Atlantic Division playoff spot is guaranteed spot is the Maple Leafs of Toronto with 82 points, and in the Metropolitan, the Rangers lead that division, followed by the Hurricanes and the Flyers. As for the two wildcard spots, those would currently go to the Lightning with 74 points, and there's a tie between the Red Wings and Islanders, both at 72, and I'm not aware how hockey tiebreakers work, so that's where I'll leave it.
We've got a great rivalry, or not really rivalry. We've got a great battle for the President's Cup trophy as well for best in the regular season. We've got Florida currently leading that with 94, but then Boston and Vancouver both have 91. New York, the Rangers at 90, and the Dallas Stars at 89. So that's a good battle. And then Charlie, I look at the Maple Leafs there. That's not ending well, right? They're definitely
no. It's not going to end well.
It never does in Toronto, and I'm okay with that. We'll put it that way.
It's going to be a movie.
I'll let you talk. Yes, I'll let you talk about Formula One.
Yeah, so Saudi Arabian Grand Prix was this past weekend, and not only was it still at Jeddah, at the Jeddah Corning circuit, but there was the new circuit that was unveiled. I'm not actually sure exactly when that is planned to be finished building, but it has been described as a Mario Kart track. I'll have to show you a picture at some point. It is a weird track. I don't know how it's going to work, but it will certainly be a lot different than the current purpose-built street track. Yes, that is an actual sentence, and that's what they actually use to describe the track. But yep, pretty boring racing. Verstappen won again. Perez got second, Leclerc in third. But I think the story of the race was Oliver Bierman, who is I believe the Ferrari reserve driver. He came in for Carlos Sainz, who is suffering from appendicitis and could not race this week. Put the car in 11th after qualifying, barely missing out on Q3, and ended up in 7th. He beat Hamilton. He beat Norris, and this guy really does have a future in the sport. I mean, I think certainly next season, looking with Hamilton leaving Mercedes, that's going to cause a chain reaction. The current disaster at Red Bull that is Christian Horner, we are going to see a massive amount of movement in the next few years, particularly in 2026 when we get the new regulations coming in. And I think he would really slot in well at a team like Mercedes, pairing him with George Russell. Or the team like that is constantly moving over. I think he could be replacing Logan Sargent at Williams. I could certainly see that. Maybe replacing Joe or Bottas at Kick Sauber is now. I can't remember the name of that team that they just changed over. Maybe replacing either at Gasly or Ocon at Alpine. They really need help. They are a disaster. The car is overweight and it is very draggy. They're going to have a disaster season. I could also see him replacing someone like Hülkenberg at Haas, though Haas, his strategy does not really involve picking up younger drivers who are more risky, so I think that would be less likely, and I don't think Red Bull is really in the option unless Perez retires. But I do think he certainly does have a future in the sport. We have a week off right now before next week we head to Albert Park in Melbourne for the third race of the season, and after that we head back to Shanghai for the first time since 2019. But with that, let's move on to NFL free agency, which this is going to be a long list.
I'll let you do the rundown.
All right, some big up first. Some big moves from some running backs. Derrick Henry was expected to lead the Titans. He did. He signs with the Ravens. A dangerous pairing of Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. Saquon Barkley becomes an instant villain in both New Jersey and New York as he goes to Philadelphia, signs with the Eagles. Eagles really need some help right now, given what happened to them at the end of last season. This should certainly help. Patriots trading Mac Jones to the Jaguars. I don't really understand this move from Jacksonville. I guess you need some insurance in case Trevor Lawrence gets hurt next season. But I think for the Patriots, this makes sense. You're going to rebuild, but you only get a 6th round pick for him.
Yeah, I've heard someone claim that Mac Jones should start over Trevor Lawrence.
Wrong.
No, it's
the Mac Jones disaster in New England is finally over, and I think they're going to attempt to really rebuild and refresh under new coach Jared Mayo. Kirk Cousins, big move. He goes to the Falcons, $120 million over 4 years. Is this enough to put the Falcons over the edge and make them the divisional favorites again?
I mean, given who else is in that division, it's possible.
I would say so, except I still think the Buccaneers are better. They re-signed Baker Mayfield, 3 years, $100
Yeah.
million. I believe a very similar contract to what Geno Smith got in Seattle. Same exact money. I don't know exactly the distribution over the years, but they got Mike Evans back. They got Baker Mayfield back. If you
Okay,
get the same production from them, I think you're going to win the division again.
But you're also forgetting that in theory now the Falcons have a competent head coach.
Well, in theory,
Yeah.
Russell Wilson, who is all but gone from Denver, is now signed in Pittsburgh. So he's got to think of a new catchphrase to go with that. We'll see how well that goes. Probably something to do with, I don't know, welding.
Yeah, I Steelers country, let's weld or something stupid.
All right,
like
I guess that will work. The Bengals trading Joe Mixon
Well,
to
you
the
know,
Texans.
Charlie, what will not work is Russell Wilson in Pittsburgh, who, hot take, will lead Mike Tomlin to his first losing season
Particularly
as a head coach.
because they just traded Deontay Johnson to the Panthers.
Yes.
I don't actually know what they got back for that, but I can't imagine it's very much.
No.
Now, Bengals trading Joe Mixon, which is a surprise, to the Texans. How dangerous are the Texans now? They have CJ Stroud, they have a young team, and they have Joe Mixon.
They're a pretty good team. I'm really looking forward to the division races. Everyone out, the Texans and the Jaguars.
Again, I think it will be a very close battle, and I wouldn't count out the Colts if they get a full year of Anthony Richardson. Jameis Winston goes to the Browns. Are you just finding more quarterbacks that exist? You have that. You have him. You have Deshaun Watson. How many quarterbacks do they have? Like 5?
More than they need. Although actually probably not when
Dorian Thompson-Robinson. They have Deshaun Watson. I think they still have. I don't think they still have Joe Flacco. They might.
No,
I don't actually know. I don't think so. Aaron Jones to the Vikings, pulling what I can only describe as a Brett Favre.
Yep.
Zach Moss goes to the Bengals. DeAndre Swift going to the Bears. I guess he just wants to be on another team that's going to disappoint, but this time with maybe Justin Fields, maybe not. Anyway, I don't really get that at all.
By the way, about the Eagles are not going to be that good next year, I don't think.
I agree. I see them still finishing second just because of how much of a disaster the Giants are. Speaking of which, they just got Drew Lock.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Good job, guys. You've locked yourself into third because you're going to beat the Commanders.
Yep.
Leonard Williams resigns with the Seahawks. Austin Eckler goes to Washington. Actually, you know what? Maybe they will get third. I don't know. I don't really care. They're both going to win like 5 games. Panthers trade Brian Burns to the Giants. Can the Panthers just give up, please? You guys are going to win like 4 games.
It's frankly kind of embarrassing.
What is it with all the Carolina teams, particularly the Charlotte ones? The Hornets are awful. The Panthers are awful. The only good team in the state is in Raleigh.
Yeah.
The Buccaneers trade Carlton Davis to the Lions. Seahawks releasing both Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs, as well as Will Dissly, cleaning up a ton of cap room. Also clearing up some cap room, I just saw this is Kansas City, who restructured Mahomes' deal, clearing up roughly $18 million in cap. Christian Wilkins to the Raiders, as well as Jordan Brooks to the Dolphins. How much help do the Dolphins need?
Quite a bit, right? I think I described them as the biggest frauds in the NFL last year.
No, that's the Eagles. That was the Eagles.
There were a lot of good candidates this year because the Cowboys were also right up there.
I mean, it's the Cowboys. That was obvious.
Sure.
Speaking of which, they are the only team who still has done absolutely nothing.
Hey, Charlie, by the way, this year's the Cowboys' year.
I think really Jerry forgot what time it was.
Yeah. No, it's their year this year.
Yes, it is their year to lose again in either the wild card round or the division. They ain't get further than that. They do either 2 things. They 3 things. They're either really bad for some reason, they get like 13 wins and lose in the wild card or divisional round, or they finish like 8-8, but they can't do that anymore. So they'll finish like 8-9. Yeah. That's the only things they can do. That's the only things they ever do.
Yeah. And
that's probably because Jerry Jones is still there.
Yeah, that would be the biggest offseason move they could make.
I think talking about Jerry Jones and his impact on the team and what maybe moving forward they need to do, I think is a story for another time.
Yep. All right. That is the end of this episode. Make sure you subscribe to the C&C Talks podcast episodes, available every single week wherever you listen to your podcasts. This is our website, cctalks.com. which has everything you need to know about the show, and call us with your questions at 360-389-2630. Again, that's 360-389-2630. Follow us on Twitter at C&C Talks Podcast, and follow Charlie at C&C Talks Charlie, and join our Discord server at cctalks.com/Discord. All this information and more is in the description below. I think that our recording software actually recorded the entire time through this time, so
It did.
with that, for our producer Morris and our production designer Zack, I'm Colin.
I'm Charlie, and we'll see you next week.